next speaker. Our next speaker is Russ Parsons, and Russ is a research ecologist with the Fire, Fuels, and Smoke Research Program at the U.S. Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station, Fire Sciences Lab in Missoula, Montana. His research spans multiple time and space scales, ranging from landscape fire and vegetation simulation modeling to highly detailed 3D fuel and physics-based fire modeling. A key theme of his current work is the development of 3D data to improve our capacity to plan and implement fuels treatments. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Russ.
All right. Hey, thanks very much for having me today. Really exciting to be part of this event and very excited particularly about where we're all headed here. So before I get going, I just want to acknowledge that I'm just part of a very big and really exciting team. And you can see we've got Rod, Kevin, folks from multiple research stations within the Forest Service, and numerous other partners that are too many to mention here. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the fuel modeling work that connects directly to the fire modeling stuff that Rod has been talking about, and the fuel measurements and remote sensing work that Nick was talking about. So let me jump into this. Okay, so this is probably something you've all heard before, but obviously we're seeing it every day that our fuel and fire management are becoming more difficult. We have an increasing array of things that are affecting our fuel and fire management work that are often interacting to make the situation more difficult. We've got invasive species, we've got beetle attacks, drought. All of these are affected by climate change, and the outcomes are making it more difficult for fire managers to get their work done safely. And at the heart of that, oh, sorry, well, gosh, are you seeing this thing up here? This, the like Zoom box at the top?
No.
Okay, good. Sorry. Okay, so in the context of where we're headed, we know that fuel is the only part of the fire behavior triangle that we can actually manipulate. So fuel is really essential to the solution space in fuel and fire management. So what we're seeing is that within both the U.S. Forest Service and in the DOI agencies, there's been a recent shift in their policies that emphasizes the use of proactive management approaches like fuel treatments and prescribed fire to move us in the right direction. But one of the challenges that we face is that the modeling that we currently have for fuel and fire management that's used operationally is really primarily focused on suppression, and fuels are not represented with a great deal of detail. So for example, if you look at the kind of typical fuels of the Great Basin, you know, you have these very, very different things between highly dense fuels in the juniper to almost nothing or nothing on the ground sometimes. And these highly discontinuous and heterogeneous fuels are really different than how we currently model fuels in our operational fire models that were developed from surface fuel beds at the fire lab in Missoula, where they have fire running through it in a little lab experiment. Those are not really applicable to what we see out there in the real world often. So we're used to collecting forest data, you know, but for inventory plots and whatnot, we have a good handle on collecting data. And the new technologies like airborne LiDAR and terrestrial LiDAR, like Nick was talking about, are completely changing our ability to do that much better. So it's extremely exciting. But where we've been is that we have models like FVS, where you can take your forest inventory data and you can project growth forward, and you can look at different silvicultural treatments. But when we get to the fire modeling, we go through this really substantial bottleneck where we have all this detail on the fuels end and very little on the fire end. So this hasn't been a problem when the objective has been primarily fire suppression, where we just want to know, hey, is this fire going to make it to that next town or not? But it gets to be a problem when you want to get proactive, because you want to talk about what are the fuels you have right now, what did you do to them with the treatment or whatever, and what does that mean for fire behavior and fire effects. So we've had this kind of bottleneck between the fuels data and the fire data capabilities, and it's been quite limiting. So Rod talked a lot about the new fire models that have been developed. I'm not going to get into this in too much detail, but it's interesting to note that the underlying math behind Rod's main model, the fire tech model, was developed in 1822, which means that it is 200 years that this kind of math has been around. Of course, they didn't have computers in 1822, which makes it even more important or remarkable. But people often think that these models came out of thin air. They are, in fact, the development of decades and even centuries of work in science. And in wildland fire science, Rod has been doing his work with 3D fire modeling for over 20 years. And I think it's achieved a certain level of maturity that often people are not aware of. So some of the applications of these 3D fire models are that you can look at the fuel structure and you can see how it would change fire behavior. And this is, again, something you can't do with Behave because there are no trees in Behave. So for example, we built this thing called Stand Fire. It takes plot level inventory data and enables you to run 3D fire models through it. In this case, this is an untreated stand, and these are 3 different crown space thinnings derived from that original case. And what you can see is that in the treated cases, the fire drops down to the ground. You're not really having a crown fire anymore. And then we have all sorts of ways we can look at that post facto in the simulation environment and see, what were the outcomes, what were the changes in fire behavior, what are the changes in predicted fire effects? So we can look at mortality. We can link that to the spatial structure of the stand. It's pretty exciting. So that system was called Stand Fire. And we realized that we need to be able to do this in more than just areas where we have the data, where we have specific plot data. So the last year or so, a little bit more, we've been developing this thing called FastFuels. And the intent of FastFuels is to basically take this capability that we built with Stand Fire and make it broadly applicable. So the intent of this is really to expand the toolbox for fire management beyond our current relatively simple fire models, and basically connect high detail fuels data to these 3D fire models for anywhere we want. So basically, the overall goals of FastFuels are to advance fuel treatment and prescribed fire science, and particularly to offer ways to leverage better data, like the terrestrial LiDAR scanning data that Nick was talking about, into these models and give us more to do with it. So we kind of think of FastFuels as a superhighway connecting fuels to fire models. And it also is kind of facilitating a Lego blocks concept where different models can interact in the same 3D space. And we think there's going to be a lot of benefits coming from that. So here's an example of some FastFuels data. You can see different colors represent different species, and it looks like little Lego blocks out there. Those are called voxels. Some people like to call them boxels. I apologize for the color scheme. It's kind of lame, but you get the idea. We get the topography, we get the 3D fuels in there, and then really what you can do with it from there is really exciting. So really this, thanks very much in part to our partnership with the Wildfire Project that Ilkay and Kevin are going to be talking about. We've been able to take FastFuels and make it into a continuous map of 3D fuels for the entire lower 48 at 1 meter voxels. And this is really because FastFuels works on a spatial window, and using their big servers and their extraordinary staff, we were able to kind of crank through and just do the whole country like that, which means we can then run 3D fire models for anywhere in the country with this kind of data. So this is FastFuels topography and fuels data. This is moisture loss. This is energy to the atmosphere. And here's the 3D wind field that's coming out of that. And I want to thank David Robinson for putting this animation together. I think it's just really powerful. And of course, I would be nowhere with this without all the amazing work of the team that put Quickfire together. So one of the things that we're trying to do with FastFuels is basically make it possible to bring in better data when it's available. So FastFuels is providing this kind of massive FIA data-driven synthetic model of fuels for the whole country, okay? But in many cases, and increasingly this will be the case going forward, you have better local data and you want to be able to use it. It hasn't been easy to do that before. So the idea is, if you think of FastFuels as a superhighway connecting fuels data to fire models, then we want on-ramps by which different fuels data sources can be assimilated into the system. So in this case, we're modeling it primarily from FIA data and some other stuff. But if you have airborne LiDAR or high resolution imagery or TLS data like Nick is talking about, well, then you can just bring it in there. You can read it in. So essentially having a structure that can deal with the detail of fuels at the individual tree level at continental scales makes it much easier to assimilate other data sources that can bring that in. One of the cool applications that we're looking at going forward here is that you can take this spatially explicit 3D fuels data and then you can run it through models like FES. So you can look at tree growth, all of the things that we're used to with that, but now they have the advantage that it's anchored in 3D data. Another really important application that we think will come from this and we're currently working on is changing how we think about firefighter training. So I don't know if people have been in the S490 recently, but this image is currently in the current 490 pre-course work, okay? And here's the question that goes with it, okay? And most people look at this grainy black and white picture and they look at this question and this is the answer they typically come up with, okay? We need to be able to change firefighter training because having a static old school approach to training when we're simultaneously dealing with all these more complicated aspects of fire management is actually dangerous. So in the military and in industrial fields, they've been using VR for firefighter for training for more than 10 years, sometimes with very sophisticated equipment. In this case, this guy in this loud orange shirt is that guy with that loud orange shirt, and he's looking out in the real world. He's in an office room, and out there he's looking out and saying, "Oh my gosh, they're loading that thing wrong." So anyway, this is an example of where we're headed with this. So this is a 3D fire simulation. You can see here's the fire. There's the smoke. This is built with FastFuels data, and it's connecting to a different fire model than Rob talked about. This is with the FDS, or Fire Dynamic Simulator. And this is the viewing package that goes with that model. What we've done is we've taken the data from one of these simulations and we've translated it over to a VR platform. So you can walk around in it and you're going to see that kick in. So now we're just recording from the headset that a grad student was using to walk through the scene. And you can see these kind of folded paper looking trees. Those are what we call low polygon models of trees. Okay, the data is coming from FastFuels, but we're representing it with 3D models that are fairly simple. Here you can see the fire behavior. The fire is moving through the scene. I think it'll also switch to showing you a view with the smoke here. So the idea is that we're trying to build a capability for people to visualize their scene with fire in it under different treatments or different cases. We think also that this will be really helpful for talking with stakeholders about what are the outcomes they want to see. And we hope that that'll help push us more towards a greater acceptance of prescribed fire and fuel treatments as the proactive tools that we need to get through all this stuff. So I think that's it for me. Let me go on to my next slide. Oh yeah. So basically, I think we're in a really exciting point in time, and I'm seeing just this tremendous collaboration across the Forest Service research, multiple partners working with people all over the country. And FastFuels is just one part of this larger picture, but what we're trying to do is really work together with better data, better models, and better tools to get better outcomes. And some of the things where this kind of setup is going to help us is in looking at fuel treatment effectiveness and planning. Planning prescribed fires. Kevin is going to be talking more about that. This firefighter training aspect. And then another aspect that people haven't really talked about, but seems profoundly likely to be important, is risk assessment, where at present our risk assessment is driven by relatively coarse data that doesn't reflect the 3D structure of the fuels. But with systems like FastFuels and QuickFire and the suite of tools that our team is building around it, we can look at risk in different ways. And because we're in kind of an early stage of all this, we're really working on this co-development kind of testing on small scale with different partners with real world projects. So that's kind of what we're trying to do to get off the ground here. So that's it for me. The phone number that's listed there is for my office phone, which I'm hardly ever at. So reach out by email and I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thanks so much.